The metal chair felt cold against Jake Morrison's back as he sat in the white room with no windows. The walls were smooth and clean, and the only sound was the quiet hum of air moving through vents somewhere above his head. He had been sitting here for what felt like hours, but time was hard to measure in this place where everything looked the same. The door opened with a soft hiss, and Jake looked up to see his captor enter the room. Commander Zexithari was tall and thin, with blue skin that seemed to shine under the bright lights. His face was longer than a human face, with large, dark eyes that never seemed to blink. Scars ran across his forehead and down his cheeks, marking him as someone who had seen many battles. Zexithari moved slowly to the chair across from Jake and sat down. He placed his hands flat on the table between them and studied the human with those dark eyes. Jake had been a Marine once, and he knew how to stay calm when someone was trying to make him nervous. He looked back at the alien commander and waited. "You are Jake Morrison," Zexithari said in perfect English, though his voice had a strange musical quality to it. "You pilot cargo ships between the outer colonies." "That's right," Jake said. "And you're holding me here because my ship broke down in your space." "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "No, you were not," the commander agreed. "Your ship suffered a power failure and drifted across our border. We found you floating in space, unconscious from lack of oxygen. We saved your life," Jake nodded. He remembered the red lights flashing on his control panel and the smell of burning circuits. Then everything had gone dark. "Thank you for that. So when can I go home?" Zexithari was quiet for a long moment. He seemed to be thinking about something important. "Tell me, Jake Morrison, what do you know about how other species view your people?" The question surprised Jake. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the commander said slowly, "what do you know about how the galaxy sees humans?" Jake shrugged. "I don't know. I guess we're new here compared to everyone else. We've only been traveling between stars for about 50 years. Most of the time when I meet aliens at trading posts, they seem curious about us. Some are friendly, some keep their distance. Normal stuff, I guess." "Curious," Zexithari repeated. "Yes, that is one word for it. But there are others. Do you know that in my language we have 17 different words for fear? Each one describes a different type of danger, a different reason to be afraid." Jake frowned. "Okay, what does that have to do with me?" "We had to create a new word," the commander said. "An 18th word for fear. We created it specifically for humans." This made Jake sit up straighter in his chair. "What are you talking about?" "We're not monsters. Most humans I know just want to live their lives in peace. We trade, we explore, we build things. We're not going around attacking people." "No," Zexithari said. "You are not monsters. That is what makes you so terrifying." Jake stared at him. "I don't understand." The commander leaned back in his chair and seemed to think about where to begin. "When my people first encountered humans, it was at a trading station near the Proxima system. Your people had been in space for only 30 years then." 30 years, Jake Morrison. "Do you understand how short that is?" "Short compared to what?" "My people took 800 years to develop space travel after we first split the atom. The Krillians took 600 years. The peaceful Altari took over 1,000 years. Most species in this galaxy needed many centuries to move from planetary flight to traveling between stars. You did it in less than 100 years. Jake thought about this. "So we're fast learners." "Is that bad?" "Fast learners," Zexithari said with something that might have been a laugh. "That is like calling a supernova a bright light. When we studied your history, we discovered something that no other species had ever done. You developed space travel while you were still fighting wars on your home planet. Well, yeah, humans have always had conflicts. No, you do not understand. Every other species in the galaxy achieved peace on their homeworld before they reached for the stars. War is wasteful, destructive. It uses resources that could be spent on exploration and science. Logic dictates that a species must end warfare before it can efficiently develop advanced technology." Jake was beginning to see where this was going. "But we didn't. You did not. In fact, your wars seemed to make your technology develop faster. You used the same science that put you in space to create weapons. You built ships that could cross between star systems, and you also built bombs that could destroy entire cities. No other species has ever done this." The room was quiet except for the humming air. Jake thought about his own time in the Marines, about the battles he had fought on distant worlds. He had never really thought about how strange it might seem to other species. "At first," Zexithari continued, "we thought this was just an odd phase your species would grow out of. We thought that once you joined the galactic community, you would become peaceful like the rest of us. We thought you would settle into the same patterns that have kept the galaxy stable for thousands of years. But we didn't. You did not. Instead, you began to change everything around you. Species that had been enemies for centuries suddenly became allies when they realized what you represented. Old agreements that had lasted for millennia were broken. The entire balance of power in the galaxy shifted. Jake leaned forward. Just because we showed up? Just because you showed up, the commander confirmed. And it happened so fast. 50 years ago, no one had ever heard of humans. Today, there is not a single government in the galaxy that does not have plans for dealing with your species. Some want to trade with you. Some want to form alliances with you. Some want to study you. And some want to destroy you before you can spread your influence further. Our influence? Sexithari nodded. You see, Jake Morrison, humans do not just exist in the galaxy. You change it. Everywhere you go, everything you touch becomes different, and that change is spreading to other species. The Altari, who had been content with their small territory for 3,000 years, have suddenly begun expanding again. The Deltans, who had given up warfare centuries ago, are building weapons. Young members of my own species are questioning traditions that have existed since before your son was born. Jake sat back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. So you're afraid of us because we're changing things? We are afraid of you because you cannot be predicted. Every other species follows patterns. They act in ways that make sense. They respond to threats and opportunities in logical ways. But humans, the commander paused, humans do things that should be impossible. And somehow you make them work. The door hissed open again and another alien entered. This one was shorter than Sexithari, with green skin and large ears. He spoke to the commander in a language Jake could not understand. Sexithari listened, then nodded. He looked back at Jake. Your government has arranged for your release. A prisoner exchange. You will be free to go in a few hours. Jake felt relief wash over him. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, the commander said. Before you go, I want to tell you why we fear your species. I want you to understand what you represent to the galaxy. Perhaps if you understand, you can help your people make better choices about their future. What do you mean? Sexithari stood up. I am going to tell you about the battles we have witnessed. About the things humans have done that should have been impossible. About the reasons why some species believe humanity must be stopped before it is too late. Jake looked up at the tall alien commander. And then? And then you will go home and you will decide whether we are right to fear you. Sexithari remained standing as he began his next story. His dark eyes seemed to look past Jake as if he was seeing something that happened long ago. The first time we truly understood what humans were capable of was during the Battle of Proxima Station. Have you heard of this battle, Jake Morrison? Jake nodded slowly. Every human knows about Proxima Station. It was one of our first major battles in space. Admiral Lisa Rodriguez and General Kevin Walsh led our forces against the Krillian horde. Yes, the commander said. But I wonder if you know the story from our perspective. The Krillians had been expanding through the galaxy for over 200 years. They were savage fighters who showed no mercy to anyone who stood in their way. Dozens of species had fallen to their attacks. Entire civilizations had been wiped out. The alien commander began to pace slowly around the room as he spoke. The Krillians were not just warriors. They were the perfect warriors. They stood 8 feet tall and weighed 3 times as much as a human. Their skin was like armor, and their claws could tear through metal. They felt no fear, no pain, no mercy. They lived only to fight and conquer. Jake listened carefully. He had heard stories about the Krillians, but mostly from human military historians who focused on tactics and strategy. He had never heard what other species thought of them. For 2 centuries, Sexithari continued, the galaxy tried to find ways to stop the Krillian expansion. We formed alliances. We shared technology. We tried diplomacy, economic pressure, even biological warfare. Nothing worked. The Krillians just kept coming, world after world, system after system. The commander stopped pacing and looked directly at Jake. And then humans arrived at Proxima Station. What made that battle different? Jake asked. Everything, Sexithari said simply. When the Krillians attacked other species, the battles followed predictable patterns. The defenders would try to hold key positions. When those positions became too costly to maintain, they would fall back to secondary positions. When those became untenable, they would attempt to negotiate or surrender to save lives. Jake could see where this was going, But humans don't surrender. That was the first shock, the commander agreed. When the Krillian fleet arrived at Proxima Station, they expected the same pattern. They sent their usual message demanding surrender. Admiral Rodriguez sent back a message that contained only 2 words in the Krillian language. What did she say? "Come closer," Zexathari said with what might have been admiration. The Krillians had never received such a response. They were confused. They sent the message again, thinking there had been a translation error. Rodriguez sent back the same 2 words. The alien commander sat back down and placed his hands on the table. The battle that followed lasted for 18 hours. The Krillians threw everything they had at the station. They sent wave after wave of fighters. They used weapons that could punch holes through mountains. They boarded the station with their elite warriors. And what happened? The humans fought back in ways that made no sense. When Krillian boarders broke into the command center, instead of surrendering, the human officers drew small weapons and fought hand-to-hand with creatures twice their size. When sections of the station lost life support, instead of evacuating, human engineers put on spacesuits and kept working. Zexathari leaned forward. But the moment that changed everything was when Captain Danny Cooper's ship was boarded. His vessel was surrounded and outnumbered 50-1. Every other species in the galaxy would have surrendered at that point. It would have been the logical thing to do. But Danny didn't surrender. No. Captain Cooper and his crew of 37 humans decided to fight. Deck by deck, room by room, they made the Krillians pay for every step forward. The Krillians had boarded thousands of ships before, and it was always the same. The crew would try to hide or they would give up when they realized the situation was hopeless. The commander's voice grew quieter. Cooper's crew did something different. When the Krillians broke into the engine room, Chief Engineer Emma Davis triggered an overload that killed herself and 12 Krillian warriors. When they reached the medical bay, Dr. Carl Johnson refused to abandon his wounded patients. He fought with surgical tools until the Krillians cut him down. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. These were not just stories to him. These were real people who had died fighting impossible odds. One by one, Cooper's crew fell back toward the bridge. The Krillians had never encountered resistance like this. Usually, boarding a ship took minutes. This took hours. When they finally reached the bridge, they found Captain Cooper alone, bleeding from multiple wounds, still trying to send a distress signal. Did he surrender then? Zexathari shook his head. He drew his sidearm and kept fighting. The Krillians killed him, but not before he had taken down 3 more of their warriors. When the battle was over, Cooper's ship was floating dead in space, but the Krillians had lost more troops taking that one vessel than they usually lost taking entire planets. The room was silent for a moment. Jake tried to imagine what it must have been like on Cooper's ship, fighting an enemy that everyone knew was unbeatable. The Krillians were shaken. The commander continued. They had never encountered a species that fought like this. But they were warriors, and they pressed their attack on the station itself. General Walsh and his ground troops were waiting for them. What did Walsh do? Something that no military commander in galactic history had ever attempted. When the Krillians landed their troops on the station, instead of trying to hold defensive positions, Walsh ordered his soldiers to attack. Human Marines charged directly at Krillian warriors in hand-to-hand combat. Jake knew this part of the story. It was taught in every military academy in human space. The Krillians were bigger and stronger, but they weren't used to prey that fought back. Exactly, Zexathari said. For 2 centuries, the Krillians had faced enemies who used reasonable tactics. Enemies who tried to minimize casualties and preserve their forces. Enemies who thought about tomorrow as well as today. But humans fought like they had nothing to lose. The alien commander stood up again and walked to the wall. I was there, Jake Morrison. I commanded a Vorthon observation ship that was monitoring the battle. We expected to record another Krillian victory for our intelligence files. Instead, we watched something that should have been impossible. You saw the battle? I saw humans do things that violated every principle of military science. I saw Sergeant Lisa Parker continue fighting after losing an arm. I saw Private Kevin Davis use a damaged rifle as a club when it stopped firing. I saw Corporal Angela Stone hold a corridor by herself for 2 hours against dozens of Krillian warriors. Zexathari turned back to face Jake. But the moment that changed galactic history was when Admiral Rodriguez ordered the final attack. The Krillians had taken most of the station. Any reasonable commander would have tried to evacuate the survivors. Instead, Rodriguez ordered every remaining human to attack the Krillian command center. And it worked. It worked because the Krillians could not understand what they were facing. They had spent centuries fighting enemies who acted predictably, enemies who valued their own lives above victory. But humans charged into battle knowing they would probably die, and they did it anyway. The commander sat back down. The battle ended when Admiral Rodriguez herself led the final assault on the Krillian flagship. She and 50 Marines fought their way to the bridge and killed the Krillian commander. Rodriguez died in that fight, but her sacrifice ended the battle. Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. And the Krillians? The surviving Krillians retreated. For the first time in 200 years, they had been defeated. But more importantly, they had learned something that terrified them. They had learned that there was a species in the galaxy that would rather die fighting than live in defeat. Zexathari looked directly at Jake. Within a month, the Krillian horde had withdrawn from 3 star systems. Within a year, they had retreated to their homeworld and sealed their borders. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for 2 centuries had been broken by one battle with humans. Because we fought back. Because you fought back in a way that made no sense. Every other species fights to win, but they also fight to survive. Humans fight to win regardless of survival. You are willing to sacrifice everything for victory, even when victory seems impossible. The alien commander was quiet for a moment. That is when the galaxy first began to fear your species. Not because you are stronger or smarter than the rest of us, but because you do not think like the rest of us. You do not follow the rules that govern how civilized beings make war. Jake thought about this. So you're afraid because we don't fight fair? We are afraid because you do not fight rationally. Every other species weighs the cost of battle against the potential gain. You seem to believe that some things are worth any cost. That kind of thinking is dangerous in a galaxy that has spent millennia learning to avoid unnecessary conflict. The door hissed open again, and the green-skinned alien from before entered and spoke quietly to Zexathari. The commander nodded and turned back to Jake. Your transport will arrive soon. But first, there are more stories you need to hear. Stories about what happens when humans face impossible odds and refuse to accept defeat. After the green-skinned alien left, Zexathari settled back into his chair with a thoughtful expression. The Battle of Proxima Station showed us that humans could fight, but we still hoped that was an exception. We told ourselves that humans would learn to be more reasonable as they encountered the realities of galactic politics. We were wrong. Jake shifted in his chair. What happened next? The siege of New Haven, the commander said quietly. That was when we realized that the fighting spirit we saw at Proxima Station was not limited to your soldiers. It existed in every human, even the ones who had never seen combat. New Haven was a farming colony, Jake said. I've been there. Nice place. Quiet people who just wanted to grow crops and raise their families. Yes, Zexathari agreed. 50,000 colonists on a peaceful world at the edge of human space. They had no military installations, no weapons factories, no strategic value. They were exactly the kind of people who should have surrendered when faced with overwhelming force. The alien commander began his story. The Zephyrian collective decided to test human resolve by attacking New Haven. The Zephyrians are experts at psychological warfare. They believe that breaking an enemy's spirit is more efficient than destroying their body. For 1,000 years, they had used this approach successfully against other species. What did they do? They surrounded the planet with their fleet and cut off all communications. No ships could get in or out. No messages could be sent to ask for help. Then they began broadcasting demands for surrender, along with detailed descriptions of what would happen to the colonists if they refused. Jake had heard about the siege, but not the details. How long did they give the colonists to decide? 1 week, Zexathari said. The Zephyrians expected the colonists to surrender within days. After all, these were farmers and shopkeepers and teachers. They had no training for war. They had no weapons except hunting rifles and farming tools. Against a fleet of warships, resistance seemed impossible. But they didn't surrender. No. Mayor Patricia Stone sent back a message that surprised everyone, including us. She thanked the Zephyrians for the warning and told them that New Haven would not surrender. She said the colonists needed the full week to prepare their defenses. Zexathari stood up and began pacing again. The Zephyrians thought this was a negotiating tactic. They had seen it before from other species. Make a show of defiance, then surrender at the last moment with better terms. So they waited. And what did the colonists do during that week? They transformed their entire world into a fortress. Under the leadership of Mayor Stone and a former soldier named Carl Johnson, every man, woman, and teenager became part of the defense. They turned their farming equipment into weapons. They dug tunnels between buildings. They converted their homes into strong points. The commander stopped pacing and looked at Jake. But that was not the most remarkable part. The most remarkable part was that they had no hope of victory. They knew help was not coming. They knew they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. They knew they would probably all die, and they prepared to fight anyway. Jake felt a familiar pride in his species, mixed with sadness for what those colonists had faced. Why did they do it? That is the question that has puzzled every military analyst in the galaxy, SciFi said. When we studied the communications intercepts from New Haven, we found something that no other species could understand. The colonists were not fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because they believed some things were more important than survival. Like what? Freedom, pride, the right to make their own choices. These are concepts that exist in other species, but not to the same degree. Most species will sacrifice these things if it means staying alive. Humans seem to believe that life without these things is not worth living. The alien commander sat back down. When the week ended and the colonists had not surrendered, the Zephyrians began their attack. They expected the resistance to crumble within hours. Instead, they found themselves fighting for every street, every building, every room. How long did it last? 8 months, SciFi said simply. 8 months of siege warfare. The Zephyrians controlled the skies and the space around the planet, but they could not break the human defenders. Every time they captured a building, they would find that the humans had booby-trapped it. Every time they advanced down a street, they would come under fire from hidden positions. The commander's voice grew more amazed as he continued. The colonists had no military training, but they learned to fight as they went. Children as young as 12 became message runners, crawling through the tunnel networks to carry orders between defenders. Elderly colonists who could barely walk became snipers, picking off Zephyrian soldiers from hidden positions. What about supplies? That was what made the siege so remarkable. The Zephyrians had cut off all supply lines. No food, no weapons, no medical supplies could reach the planet. The colonists were supposed to starve into submission. Instead, they found ways to make what they needed. SciFi leaned forward. They converted their greenhouses into ammunition factories. They used fertilizer to make explosives. They turned medical equipment into communication devices. When they ran out of metal for weapons, they melted down farming tools and kitchen utensils. Jake shook his head in amazement. How did they hold out for 8 months? Because they refused to accept that the situation was hopeless. Mayor Stone organized the civilians into work groups that kept the city functioning even under bombardment. Carl Johnson trained teenagers to be soldiers and taught them tactics using children's games. When the hospital was destroyed, they set up medical stations in basements and continued treating the wounded. The alien commander was quiet for a moment. But the moment that truly showed us what humans are capable of happened in the 6th month of the siege. The Zephyrians had finally broken through the main defensive line. They thought the siege was over. Instead, they found that the humans had prepared a second line of defense behind the first. A fallback position? More than that. The colonists had used the time during the siege to expand their tunnel network. They had connected every building in the city underground. Even when the Zephyrians controlled the surface, the human defenders could move unseen beneath their feet. SciFi stood up again. The Zephyrians realized they were not fighting a conventional enemy. They were fighting an entire population that had decided death was preferable to defeat. Every building they captured became a battleground. Every street became a kill zone. Every colonist became a potential threat. When did help finally arrive? Commander Steve Parker arrived with the battleship USS Defiance and a relief fleet in the 8th month. But when they reached New Haven, they found something unexpected. The siege was not a desperate defensive action anymore. The colonists had begun launching raids against Zephyrian positions. Jake stared at the alien commander. They were attacking? Small groups of colonists had been sneaking out of the city at night to sabotage Zephyrian equipment and supplies. They had no hope of winning these raids, but they did them anyway. The Zephyrians, who were supposed to be the attackers, found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders. SciFi sat back down. When Commander Parker's fleet arrived, they expected to find a broken city full of desperate survivors. Instead, they found a fortress that had grown stronger during the siege. The colonists had not just survived. They had adapted and evolved into something the galaxy had never seen before. What happened to the Zephyrians? They withdrew immediately when the relief fleet arrived. But the damage to their reputation was permanent. The species that had conquered dozens of worlds through psychological warfare had been defeated by farmers and shopkeepers who refused to be intimidated. The commander looked directly at Jake. That siege changed how the galaxy views humans. It proved that your fighting spirit is not limited to your soldiers. Every human, from the youngest child to the oldest grandparent, seems to possess this same refusal to surrender. That is what terrifies other species. Because we don't know when to quit. Because you do not seem to have a breaking point. Every other species has a moment when survival instinct overrides everything else. A point where they will surrender to save lives, even if it means accepting defeat. Humans appear to lack this basic survival mechanism. Zexathari was quiet for a moment. After New Haven, military analysts throughout the galaxy began studying human psychology. What they found was disturbing. Your literature is filled with stories that glorify hopeless last stands and Pyrrhic victories. Your children are raised on tales of heroes who chose death over surrender. And that's bad? It is terrifying. Other species tell stories that celebrate wisdom in retreat and living to fight another day. They teach their young that survival is the highest virtue. But humans teach that some things are worth dying for, even when death accomplishes nothing practical. The door hissed open, and the green-skinned alien entered again. He spoke briefly with Zexathari, then left. The commander turned back to Jake. Your transport is being prepared, but there is more you need to understand about why the galaxy fears your species. The battles were just the beginning. What happened next was even more frightening. Jake waited for the commander to continue. Zexathari walked to the far wall and touched a panel. The wall became transparent, showing the stars outside the station. After New Haven, the galaxy hoped that humans would settle into predictable patterns. We thought that once you understood the realities of space warfare, you would develop conventional tactics and technologies like everyone else. We were wrong again. Jake looked out at the stars. What do you mean? The Nexari Empire decided to teach humans their place in the galactic order. The Nexari possessed the most advanced technology in the galaxy. They had energy shields that had protected their ships for 3,000 years. Their weapons could destroy entire fleets. Their soldiers were enhanced with cybernetic implants that made them faster and stronger than any organic being. The commander turned away from the window. The Nexari believed that superior technology would always defeat primitive determination. They had used this approach successfully for millennia. When they encountered a species with inferior technology, they would demonstrate their superiority until that species accepted Nexari leadership. But it didn't work with humans? At first it appeared to work perfectly. When the Nexari fleet engaged human forces at the Battle of Kepler 438, they won easily. Human ships were destroyed or damaged, and human casualties were heavy. The Nexari commander sent the usual demand for surrender, expecting humans to recognize their technological disadvantage. Zexathari sat back down. Admiral Grace Turner sent back a message that puzzled the Nexari. She thanked them for the demonstration and asked for 48 hours to prepare her response. What did she do in those 48 hours? Something that no other species had ever attempted. Instead of trying to match Nexari technology, Admiral Turner worked with scientist Dr. Alan Rodriguez and engineer Emma Davis to find ways to turn that technology against itself. The alien commander leaned forward. You see, Jake Morrison, every other species approaches technological challenges the same way. When they encounter superior technology, they try to develop their own superior technology. This process usually takes decades or centuries. But humans did something different. Humans did something impossible. Within those 48 hours, they analyzed Nexari shield frequencies and discovered that the shields could be overloaded by modified mining lasers. They found that Nexari cybernetic implants could be disrupted by electromagnetic pulses from modified communication equipment. They learned that Nexari targeting systems could be confused by swarms of simple drones. Jake whistled softly. 48 hours? 48 hours, Zexathari confirmed. When the next battle began, the Nexari found themselves facing human ships that should have been helpless against their technology. Instead, Nexari shields were failing, their cybernetic soldiers were collapsing, and their sophisticated targeting systems were being overwhelmed by clouds of primitive drones. The commander stood up and began pacing again. But that was not the most disturbing part. The most disturbing part was how humans had accomplished this feat. They had not developed new technology. They had taken existing technology and used it in ways that its creators had never intended. Like what? Mining lasers were designed to cut through asteroids. Humans used them to overload energy shields. Communication jammers were meant to block enemy signals. Humans used them to shut down cybernetic implants. Industrial drones were built to carry cargo. Humans turned them into missile swarms. Zexathari stopped pacing and looked at Jake. Every other species views technology as something to be carefully refined and perfected over generations. Humans treat technology as a toolbox to be constantly modified and reimagined. You do not just use tools. You abuse them, push them beyond their intended limits, and somehow make them work. Is that wrong? It is unprecedented. For thousands of years, technological development in the galaxy has followed predictable patterns. Species develop new technologies slowly and carefully. They test them extensively before deployment. They follow established engineering principles. The commander sat back down. Humans ignore all of these principles. You take risks that other species consider suicidal. You combine technologies in ways that should not work. You modify equipment while it is still being used in battle. And it works? That is what makes it so terrifying. Human engineer Billy Carter once created a functioning life support system, using parts from a coffee machine, a communications array, and a waste recycling unit. When Nexari technicians examined his work later, they declared it impossible according to their understanding of physics. Jake grinned. Sounds like Billy was pretty clever. Billy Carter was trapped in a damaged space station with no hope of rescue. The life support system had failed and he had maybe 6 hours of air left. Any reasonable engineer would have focused on sending a distress signal and conserving oxygen while waiting for help. Zexathari's voice grew more amazed as he continued. Instead, Carter decided to build a new life support system from scratch using whatever he could find. He connected circuits that were never meant to be connected. He used software designed for communications to control atmospheric processors. He created a system that violated every safety protocol in existence. But it kept him alive. It kept him alive for 3 weeks until a rescue ship arrived. The system should have exploded or poisoned him or simply failed to work. Instead, it functioned perfectly. When engineers from 5 different species studied Carter's design, none of them could explain why it worked. The alien commander was quiet for a moment. That incident represents everything that frightens the galaxy about human innovation. You do not follow the rules that govern how technology is supposed to work. You seem to believe that if something is needed badly enough, a way can be found to make it happen. Maybe we're just more willing to take risks. Risk implies that you understand the potential consequences and choose to proceed anyway. What humans do is different. You attempt things that should be impossible and somehow succeed. You ignore the limitations that constrain other species. Zexathari stood up and walked back to the window. After the Nexari defeats, every major power in the galaxy began studying human technology and tactics. What they found was that humans had developed innovations in months that should have taken centuries. Like what? Adaptive armor that could adjust to different types of weapons. Communication systems that could not be jammed. Ships that could repair themselves during battle. Each innovation was built on principles that other species had dismissed as impractical or impossible. The commander turned back to Jake. But the most disturbing discovery was that human innovation was accelerating. Each new challenge seemed to make your species more creative, not less. Where other species became more cautious as they encountered greater dangers, humans became more willing to experiment. So we adapt quickly. Why is that scary? Because adaptation implies gradual change in response to environmental pressures. What humans do is transformation. You do not just adapt to new situations. You fundamentally alter how you approach problems. Zexathari sat back down. When the Nexari introduced new shield technology to counter human weapons, humans did not develop better weapons. Instead, they created tactics that made shields irrelevant. When the Zephyrians improved their psychological warfare techniques, humans did not develop better mental defenses. Instead, they found ways to turn psychological attacks into advantages. How? Commander Lisa Hayes used Zephyrian fear broadcasts as navigation beacons to locate hidden enemy positions. Captain Robert Chen turned Zephyrian demoralization attempts into propaganda tools that strengthened human resolve. Major Angela Foster used enemy psychological profiles to predict their tactics and set traps. The alien commander was quiet for a moment. Every other species in the galaxy follows logical patterns when facing new challenges. They analyze the problem, research solutions, develop new approaches, test them carefully, and then implement them gradually. This process maintains stability and reduces risk. But humans don't do that. Humans seem to view every problem as an opportunity to try something that has never been attempted before. You experiment constantly, even in the middle of battles. You combine ideas from completely different fields. You implement solutions before you fully understand why they work. Zexathari looked directly at Jake. That approach should result in constant failures and disasters. Instead, it seems to give humans an impossible advantage over species that follow more logical methods. The door hissed open, and the green-skinned alien entered once more. This time he carried a small device that he handed to Zexathari. The commander examined it and nodded. "Your transport has arrived," he said to Jake. "But before you leave, there is one more thing you must understand. The battles and the innovation were frightening enough, but they are not the real reason the galaxy fears humans. What is? Your influence is spreading to other species, and that threatens to destroy the order that has kept the galaxy stable for thousands of years." Zexathari set the device on the table and looked at Jake with an expression that seemed almost sad. The battles we could understand. The innovation was disturbing but explicable. What we could not predict was how deeply human influence would affect other species. Jake leaned back in his chair. "What do you mean by influence?" "For thousands of years, the galaxy has been stable. Each species found their place in the cosmic order and remained there. The Altari explored and traded. The Vorthan Empire maintained peace through strength. The Deltans focused on art and philosophy. Everyone understood their role. The commander stood up and walked to the window again. This stability was built on certain shared assumptions. All species agreed that expansion should be gradual and careful. All species accepted that some conflicts were better avoided than won. All species understood that survival was more important than abstract principles. And then humans showed up. And demonstrated that all of these assumptions were wrong. You proved that rapid expansion was possible. You showed that any conflict could be won with enough determination. You demonstrated that some principles were worth dying for." Zexathari turned back to face Jake. "At first, we thought human behavior was an anomaly that would not spread. We believed that other species were too civilized to adopt such primitive approaches to problem solving. We were wrong. Other species started acting like humans. The Altari Republic was humanity's first alien ally. For 3,000 years, they had been content with their small territory in the Vega system. They were peaceful traders who avoided conflict and focused on maintaining stable relationships with their neighbors." The commander sat back down. Within 5 years of forming an alliance with humans, the Altari had launched their first exploration mission beyond their traditional borders. Within 10 years, they had established 3 new colonies. Within 15 years, they were building their first military fleet in over a millennium. Jake was surprised. They became more aggressive. They became more ambitious. They began taking risks they had never considered before. They started viewing the galaxy as a place full of opportunities rather than a place full of dangers. Their young people began talking about exploration and adventure instead of stability and security. Zexathari's voice grew more concerned. But the Altari were not the only ones affected. The peaceful Deltans, who had given up warfare centuries ago, suddenly announced that they were developing defensive technologies. The isolationist Kethvar began sending diplomatic missions to other species for the first time in their recorded history. Because they were inspired by humans? Because they were infected by human attitudes. Your species does not just exist in the galaxy, Jake Morrison. You change everything around you. Your refusal to accept limitations, your drive to constantly push boundaries, your absolute refusal to give up. These traits seem to be contagious. The alien commander was quiet for a moment. "Young members of my own species have begun questioning traditions that have existed since before your son was born. They ask why we do not expand beyond our current borders. They wonder why we accept that some problems cannot be solved. They want to know why we do not take the risks that humans take." "Is that really so bad?" Zexathari looked directly at Jake. "It is terrifying because we do not know where it will lead. The galactic order that has maintained peace for millennia is built on predictability. Each species knows what to expect from every other species. Treaties and alliances are stable because everyone follows the same basic rules. But humans don't follow those rules. Humans reject the very concept of unchanging rules. You seem to believe that any system can be improved, any limit can be overcome, any problem can be solved if enough effort is applied. That kind of thinking is dangerous in a galaxy that has learned to live with certain realities. The commander stood up and began pacing again. President Helen Martinez and Colonial Administrator Peter Young have announced plans to establish human settlements in 12 new star systems within the next decade. That rate of expansion is unprecedented in galactic history. We have a lot of people who want to explore and build new homes. You have a lot of people who refuse to accept that there are limits to how fast a species should expand. Every other species learned to control their growth to avoid conflicts with their neighbors. Humans seem to believe that the galaxy is big enough for unlimited expansion. Zexathari stopped pacing. But expansion is just one example. Human corporations are developing technologies at rates that destabilize entire economic sectors. Human explorers are pushing into regions of space that other species consider too dangerous to investigate. Human diplomats are proposing changes to treaties that have kept the peace for centuries. We're trying to make things better. You are trying to make things different, and difference is dangerous when it happens too quickly. The galaxy has learned to fear rapid change because rapid change leads to instability, and instability leads to conflict. The alien commander sat back down. There are factions within every major government that believe humanity must be contained before your influence spreads further. They argue that human attitudes will eventually destroy the careful balance that has prevented large-scale wars for thousands of years. Jake felt a chill. They want to destroy us? Some do. Others want to study you, to understand how a species can develop so quickly without destroying itself. A few even want to join you to learn how to adopt human approaches to problem-solving. Zexathari leaned forward, but all of them agree on one thing. The galaxy will never be the same as long as humans exist in it. Your species represents something entirely new in cosmic history, a species that does not just adapt to the universe but forces the universe to adapt to them. Is that wrong? It is unprecedented, and the unprecedented is always frightening to those who have learned to live with the predictable. The door hissed open, and 2 guards entered. One was the green-skinned alien Jake had seen before. The other was taller and had silver skin that seemed to shine in the bright lights. "Your transport is ready," Zexathari said, standing up. "You will be taken to the exchange point where human and Vorthon prisoners will be swapped." Jake stood up as well. "What happens now?" "Now you go home and tell your people what you have learned. You tell them that the galaxy is watching humanity with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and admiration. You tell them that some species want to destroy you, some want to study you, and some want to become like you." The commander walked to the door, then stopped and turned back. "But most importantly, you tell them that the future is no longer predictable. For the first time in galactic history, no one knows what will happen next. The old order is changing and humans are the reason why. And what do you think will happen?" Zexathari was quiet for a long moment. "I think the galaxy will eventually be forced to choose. Either we learn to live with human unpredictability, or we find a way to eliminate it. There is no middle ground with your species." The guards moved to escort Jake toward the door. As they reached the threshold, Zexathari spoke again. "Jake Morrison, there is one more thing you should know. In my language, we now have a 19th word for fear." Jake stopped and looked back. "What does it mean?" "It is the fear of becoming irrelevant. The fear that everything you have built and everything you believe in will be swept away by forces you cannot control or understand." The alien commander looked directly at Jake. "We created that word after studying human history, after learning how quickly your species changes everything it touches, after realizing that contact with humans means the end of the galaxy as we have always known it." Jake thought about this as the guards led him through corridors toward the docking bay where his transport waited. He thought about Proxima Station in New Haven and all the other battles where humans had refused to surrender. He thought about the innovations and the rapid expansion and the changes that were spreading to other species. As he boarded the small ship that would take him to the exchange point, Jake realized that Commander Zexathari was right about one thing. The galaxy would never be the same. Humans had arrived, and they had brought with them ideas that challenged everything the other species thought they knew about how the universe worked. The transport ship undocked from the station and began its journey toward human space. Through the small window, Jake could see the stars stretching out in all directions. Somewhere among those stars were billions of aliens who were trying to decide what to do about humanity. Some feared humans, some admired them, and some wanted to destroy them. But as Jake settled back in his seat for the long journey home, he realized that it did not matter what the other species decided. Humans would continue to explore, to innovate, to push boundaries, and to refuse to accept that anything was impossible. That was simply who they were, and the galaxy would have to learn to live with that reality whether it wanted to or not.